Hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving. Mine was great. Um, we had just about 6, 7 people together, so we fit the criteria for and have a big enough table to socially distance while we were eating. Okay, so I probably need to speak up. Um, it's quiet here. So what we're going to talk about today, I've thought about before, and I've thought about when I was practicing, and thought about when I was a resident physician back in the early 90s, sorry, the late 80s. But overall, you wonder if your doctor is making um, decisions in your best interest. Are they being influenced, is what I'm saying. Well, the answer is yes, they are. And so there was a study from, let's see, published November 24th. It was a little study that was done by Aaron Mitchell, who's an MD and has a master's in public health. He works at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. And so the question is, what about pharmaceutical payments to doctors? Well, the title of this is Pharmaceutical Payments and Increased Prescribing Go Hand in Hand. So it turns out there's, I guess, several studies that have been alluded to over the years. And I remember Senator Ted Kennedy, back in the 90s, I think is when he started talking about pharmaceutical incentives, whether that be financial or gifts or trips. Back in the early 90s, as a faculty member, I was sent on trips, and I was a paid speaker. Not necessarily for a drug per se, but I was allowed to travel for free and go to meetings and be a speaker at meetings, several national ones actually. And I remember going to the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists annual convention in 1988. And when you walked into the pharmaceutical room, I guess, where companies have representatives, pharmaceutical companies have representatives there to talk with meeting attendees, physicians, about their drug or their product or their machine or their supplement, whatever. And when you walked into the room, it's usually in a huge meeting room. Ortho Pharmaceuticals had right inside the door a huge display with all kinds of representatives there and all kinds of things and freebie stuff. But one of the things they gave us was a driver for golf. So we got everybody that stopped by the booth. They would give them a driver. So I haven't bought a driver in a long time, so I don't know what that was worth, or even if it was a very good driver, because I'm not the greatest golfer ever in any way, shape, or form. So basically, that got me thinking, well, I've gotten textbooks from pharmaceutical companies. They would imprint their logo on the back of the textbook as, an educational gift from Ortho Pharmaceuticals or whatever pharmaceutical company had provided that. I did participate in a randomized trial that was funded by TAP Pharmaceuticals for Lupron treatment of endometriosis. That was a trip to Scottsdale, but it was a trip for people that were in the multi-center randomized trial, so that one was probably reasonable. They wanted everybody to get together and go over the way we were going to do this study. So this physician states that financial payments from pharmaceutical companies were consistently associated with increased prescribing across a wide range of physician specialties and drug classes and prescribing decisions. So all studies today, he says, are unanimous. So accepting gifts from the pharmaceutical industry changes physician prescribing, uh, and he says makes us worse doctors. That's a quote. So financial conflicts of interest with the drug industry are therefore contrary to our patients' interests. So he goes on to say, collectively we need to acknowledge that accepting money from industry is below professional standards that we set for ourselves and quickly take action to end this practice. So you still, it's not legal after Ted Kennedy, it's not legal for physicians to be just given gifts or money. So you have to participate in something educational. And then they still get by with it. So not necessarily like you get a check, but at dinner, at a pretty nice fancy restaurant. I've given lots of talks at dinners. I've been to lots of talks where dinner was served. And this isn't a club sandwich. It's usually a fillet. It's usually at a high-end restaurant. So I've participated in those types of things in Omaha and Oklahoma City. Not so much in southwest Missouri. You don't see it. I practiced in a town of about 9,000 people, so there wasn't a whole lot of doctors there to collect doctors in one place. Okay, so according to these researchers, 30 of these studies that they looked at, so they looked at 36, and they had 101 analyses examining the effect of financial payments to physicians. And according to 30 of the studies, they identified a positive association between financial payments and prescribing, and then 6 studies showed a mix of positive and null findings, meaning there was no association. And then they went on to say that no study had only null findings, meaning there was not a relationship between financial incentives and decisions to prescribe. So hematologists, oncologists, and primary care physicians were the most common physician types to receive payment, followed by urologists. The most common drug class studied was opioids, followed by anti-cancer drugs. And of the 101 individual analyses, 89 identified a positive association between payments and prescribing. So payments from a particular pharmaceutical company was associated with an increased prescribing practice of that company's drug. It increased prescribing costs, and it increased prescribing of branded drugs, in other words, not generics. There were also associated, the payments, with prescribing of less effective drugs and similarly effective but more expensive drugs. Okay, so that got me to start looking around at different articles about this. So we're going to expand on this a little bit more. So in June of 2018, a physician named Lauren Ashley Umstattd at the University of Missouri School of Medicine in Columbia, my alma mater, where I went to medical school, published an article on In the House. So it was it's a website for medical residents and fellows. At the time, she was an ENT physician resident at the University of Missouri, so I'm not sure if she's graduated or is in practice. But her title was "We're Ignoring a Key Factor in the Opioid Epidemic." And in this article, she talks about doctors and pharmaceutical companies being demonized for manufacturing and dispensing of opioid analgesics. Well, that kind of started back in the 90s, where we were told, and I remember this very well, that you cannot create an opioid addict by treating pain. Well, that's not true. And so basically we were being chastised back then for not treating pain aggressively enough. So the way of looking at it, I'll just read you this paragraph. Pharmaceutical companies and physicians are being demonized for their manufacturing and dispensing of opioid analgesics Money-hungry executives from Big Pharma caused the crisis by brainwashing doctors to prescribe these medications left and right. Well, that's sort of true. Greedy doctors want patients dependent upon them for years, ensuring a steady stream of paying patients in their waiting rooms. Drugs drive the market. Drugs lead to big profits for everyone involved. The more drugs, the better. Okay, so that was that's kind of been the thinking. FDA, DEA keeps coming after doctors, chronic pain management physicians. I've had Dr. Mark Ibsen from Montana on the Art of Floundering podcast about a month ago. He's been fighting the Montana Medical Board for a number of years. He actually got a court order to have them stop what they were doing to him, but he is a chronic pain management physician. So Dr. Umstattd, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not, says wrong. So she says wrong. I firmly believe physicians want what's best for their patients. Well, that's true. The vast majority of physicians want what's best for their patients, but doesn't mean that they can't be led by the nose to an extent. So we train for a bunch of years before becoming independent, spending hours with patients and families, asking questions, ordering tests, establishing a diagnosis, and counseling treatment options for patients. So she says, if doctors were so greedy, wouldn't Wall Street have been a better destination than clinical exam rooms and physician's office? And to think that physicians are mindless drug pushers. There's a friend of mine in Oklahoma City that's been fighting the Oklahoma State Medical Board and the DEA, and actually criminal charges for doing chronic pain management. He was raided by the DEA and the FBI. I keep saying FDA, they're involved, but the FBI usually gets involved in this. So they raided him. He had cameras in his office because he was writing opioid analgesics for chronic pain syndrome. First thing they did was knock out his video system, so you couldn't see what they were doing. So that is kind of interesting, I think. So basically, doctors have been criminally charged for helping chronic pain patients. And there's a way to do opioid pain management without getting out of control. And I think we're going to discuss this on the Art of Floundering podcast after the Thanksgiving holiday break, etc. Because it keeps coming up and keeps coming up. So Dr. Ibsen is one in Montana. Dr. Jenkins, Harvey Jenkins, is the physician in Oklahoma. And he actually spent about 3 weeks in Oklahoma County Jail about 2 years ago. So we may not ever understand exactly why there was a precipitation of opioid overprescribing, other than the fact that we were told that you cannot create an addict by prescribing opioid medications for pain. Okay, so this movement started about 2001 when the Joint Commission that reviews hospitals and healthcare organizations and programs instituted what was called a pain management standard. And so this was put forth by the American Pain Society. And so the Joint Commission emphasized that pain needs to be regularly assessed in all patients. Well, I haven't practiced in a hospital since 2012, but it was on the board in each room. They always have those little marker boards where the nurse puts her name, the doctor puts their name, and there was a pain scale in every hospital room from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, I guess. And it was considered a fifth vital sign. So pain became as important as heart rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, and blood oxygen level. So that became the fifth vital sign. And so with each encounter with a patient, whether that be in the hospital, post-op, ICU, and really in your office, healthcare providers were required to ask and record the patient's pain level on a 0 to 10 scale alongside the clinical measures of essential body functions. Okay, and then you fast forward after that was instituted, where traditional fee-for-service payment models were falling by the wayside, and physicians were now being reimbursed via pay-for-performance models. And the performance model included patient satisfaction. So that became a big deal. So, I mean, the hospital, the physician, etc., could be less reimbursed if their patient satisfaction scores, I think they had to be 92% or higher. So you'd have 92% of patients say that you were a great doctor and this is a great hospital. Otherwise, you get zonked. You get less payment. So pain control and patient satisfaction kind of went together, right? So physicians were being encouraged to optimize pain control for every patient in every setting. So outpatient, inpatient, post-op, PACU, ICU, etc. So opioids were used because they worked. Okay, you're going to have pain relief from opioids for the most part, unless you're tolerant. And that's a subject of a whole other class. So they may not be the best drug for the job, but they would give pain relief. They're relatively inexpensive. One of my problems with Xanax is, Xanax is really easy to get dependent on, and it's so cheap. You can get generic Xanax, alprazolam, I think 90 pills for $10 cash. So if you're taking 3 1 milligram Xanax a day, in 2 weeks you're dependent on it, and you try to stop and you can't. Okay? So patients got improved pain control, doctors had higher patient satisfaction scores, hospitals got better scores, hospital administrators were happy. So she talks about Newton's third law of physics. So every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That was an interesting segue, I thought. And the opposite reaction grew into the opioid epidemic that we've been fighting now for, 6, 7, 8 years maybe? Okay, so what she asks what we're ignoring when it comes to tackling that epidemic, and she puts forth 2 things: the public's perception of pain control and the physician's willingness to discuss pain management expectations. Okay, so she talks about, being a surgeon. If you cut into somebody, if you use a scalpel, if you use a cautery unit, whatever, you're going to have some post-operative pain. Okay, so some tissue damage, sewing, stitches, all that, you should expect that you're going to have some pain post-operatively, and there is no way to take away every ounce of pain. Well, that's the patient satisfaction score. They want a pain scale rating of 0. I am having no pain at all. That's kind of the goal, and that's not reachable for most people. So when a surgeon talks about surgery post-operatively, she thinks the emphasis should be placed on risks versus benefits. And so when I was doing addiction medicine, I can't count how many patients would tell me, I am so aggravated that I wound up dependent on opioids, and my physician didn't tell me that there was a risk of addiction or dependence or tolerance requiring higher and higher doses, or I wouldn't have taken this Lortab. And I used to tell post-op patients, I will give you about 10 days worth of Lortab or Percocet or whatever was the opioid of choice for that year. And they'd say, well, what if I still have pain? And I would say, well, you're going to have to come in and let me assess you, because within about 2 weeks I'm going to have you dependent on opioids, and then getting you off them is going to be like a long haul. So really, surgeons should talk to patients about post-surgical pain and what's their acceptable level of pain. So there's going to be some discomfort, but you need to know all of your post-operative pain control options. Okay, so opioids is one, Um, and then you need to know the risks of each option. So for opioids, it's dependence or even addiction. If somebody has an addictive personality, that's based on brain flow. In addition to prescribing over-the-counter, well, not even prescribing, to prescription medications, they're over-the-counter medications. So now you go to the emergency room, they will not give you an opioid, they'll give you a Tylenol, even if you chainsawed yourself. That's pretty much what you get as a Tylenol. And then discussing non-pharmacologic techniques, so ice, heat, massage, all that kind of stuff that really should be talked about. And the CDC put out pain management guidelines in 2016 that discussed doing all that before you used an opiate. And so lots of patients now don't get post-operative opioids at all. It kind of, the pendulum swung all the way to the other way, to where doctors were just scared of prescribing anything. Okay? Alright, so if you go back to, so that's the pain management, opioid epidemic story from a resident physician, at least a resident 2 years ago. If you go back to 2016, pharmaceutical companies were put under a spotlight for unseemly marketing. Okay, so Purdue Pharmaceuticals pled guilty to criminal charges. They were the makers of OxyContin, and I think they filed for bankruptcy protection. The state of Oklahoma sued a whole bunch of pharmaceutical opiate makers, opiate companies, and won a huge and enormous settlement from the state versus, I think, 3 or 4 big pharmaceutical companies that made opiates. So now you get all these pharmaceutical companies that are having to pay back, I guess, a lot of their profits. So back in 2016, Allergan agreed to pay $38 million to settle allegations of paying kickbacks between 2008 and 2012 to encourage doctors to prescribe 4 of its medications. So they were found to reward high prescribing doctors with speaking engagements that were billed as educational sessions. There was a whistleblower lawsuit filed in 2012 by a former sales rep of Forest Pharmaceuticals, which was later bought out by Allergan. So the events for educational sessions, like I said earlier, were often held in fancy restaurants, and the whole purpose of the meeting was to woo other doctors to attend so that she could influence their prescribing practices. So Allergan had used those methods to boost prescriptions of Bistolic, which is for high blood pressure, Namenda, which is a treatment for Alzheimer's, and Sabella, which is an antidepressant. So the statement in this article is that behavior in multiple drug companies is not new. Okay, so lots of pharmaceutical companies have been struck with whistleblower lawsuits by employees who've been witness to unseemly marketing practices. I remember a documentary, can't think of the name of it now, where a former sales representative for Lipitor talked about the unseemly marketing while basically hiding study results that weren't favorable to Lipitor, incentives for Lipitor, and she basically said that the company knew that Lipitor was basically sort of dangerous and not really that helpful, and the data didn't show that so many people should be on Lipitor, and they just hid all that. So she's on camera showing her face and her name and all that. Wish I could think of the name of that documentary. It's pretty fascinating. So in this article, 2016, a total of $743 million in fines and settlements with the governments was paid between 1991 and 2015 to settle kickback allegations. That was a report by Public Citizen, which is a consumer advocacy group. This also happens in other countries, so it's considered a global problem. And 3 of the world's biggest drug companies, so GlaxoSmithKline, AstraZeneca, and Novartis, along with two other smaller companies, agreed to pay $63 million in 2016 to settle allegations that they violated the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act by bribing doctors and government officials to promote their medications. Okay. Well, then you think, okay, well, government officials, what does that mean? And we're going to discuss that, and then we're going to be dead. Then we're going to be done, not dead, done. Okay, so this is from 2018 as well. An investigative report uncovers little recognized and unpoliced potential conflicts of interest among those who serve on FDA advisory panels that review drugs for FDA approval on the market. So some members of such panels are later receiving significant payments from either the makers of drugs they previously reviewed or from their competitors. So the other pharmaceutical companies competing with the pharmaceutical company that they're approving their drug for. So this is happening despite the FDA's established system to identify possible financial conflicts of interest among those recruited for drug advisory panels. So this investigation, I think it was by Science Magazine, analyzed records on the Federal Open Payments website between 2013 and 2016 of 107 physician advisors who voted on FDA advisory committees during this time. 26 of 107 later took more than $100,000 from the maker of drugs or from competing firms in post hoc earnings or research support. So, it says even though those payments may not be truly quid pro quo, according to Vinay Prasad, an oncologist who also studies financial conflicts that exist in drug approvals, those asked to weigh in stand to gain tremendously in their further professional careers. So it's in their best interest to play nice with these companies. Okay? So he's saying the FDA may also have missed or judged insignificant financial ties physicians had before their service on the drug approval advisory committees. Okay, so see, there are financial incentives. It does. The 36 studies show that, well, 30 of 36 studies show that prescribing decisions are influenced by marketing by pharmaceutical companies so that you're getting maybe not the best treatment for you. There's another study, I can't remember where I found it, basically talking about price fixing on generics. So that's also going on. So I ran across an article, this is from 2016, where a bunch of 11th graders in Australia reproduced a medication that's used for toxoplasmosis. So not a whole lot of people running around taking toxoplasmosis drugs. But the CEO of the company that took over that medication, or the company that made that medication, raised the retail price from $13.50 a pill to $750 per pill. And so these 11th graders and their teacher decided, okay, well, they found the patent for the medication. I'm not going to name the medication because it's nothing you've ever heard of. But they found the patent and they decided, well, we're going to try to make this. So they started with, let's see, I want to say $20 worth. Yeah, they started the project with just $20 of the drug, and they produced the same quantity that would cost $110,000 on the market. Okay, the purity was the same as what was being produced by the pharmaceutical company, and they did it basically for $2 a pill. So $2 a pill, $110,000 worth of that medication, and they didn't sell it or anything. They just wanted to prove a point. So that's the kind of stuff going on with pharmaceuticals and incentives, etc., etc. And so then we're going to hit into, and then we'll quit. we're going to hit into this vaccine thing. So this is from November 25th, Science Magazine. So everybody's getting all these announcements about about these new vaccines. Pfizer was the first, and then there was an efficacy. Russia has one, China has one. Efficacy of a vaccine candidate from the University of Oxford, and then AstraZeneca. So now there's 4 that have reported preliminary results. So they're going to focus on AstraZeneca and Oxford. They reported November 22nd that an interim analysis of trials in the United Kingdom and Brazil found an average efficacy of 70%. And remember, Pfizer is reporting over 90%. So the efficacy in Brazil and the UK studies range from 62 to 90% depending on the strategy. And I won't go through the science about how they did this, but they used an adenovirus from chimpanzees to code for the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, which is the viral cause of COVID-19. What they found in the UK studies was that there was a manufacturing error that led AstraZeneca to fill vials with only half of the intended dose. So I think it's 1 dose followed by a month later by another dose. So 2 shots, 4 weeks apart. And what they found was, and so they kept doing the study. They found that however many people only got half the dose. So it says 131 total cases of COVID-19 at the interim analysis. They didn't give any details about the numbers in each group. But the group that did the best is the one that got the half dose priming shot. So that efficacy was 90%. Okay? So they stated, well, the half dose scheme may help prevent transmission of the virus and may mimic a viral infection that's you're building immunity to. So if you were exposed to coronavirus, maybe you were positive, and 99+% of us do not die from this virus, and theoretically have an immunity once we form an IgG antibody. So the question is, what are you going to do if your best response is half the dose of what you're trying to get approved for this distribution and giving people vaccines in the general public? Do you use the better half dose, priming dose, and then go to the full dose? Or do you start with the full dose and know that you're going to drop your result to 62% efficacy? Okay, so once again, I mean, this is not going to be available for the general public and probably until the summer, maybe fall of 2021. And we'll see how this develops. But already, I mean, it's not that big an enormous number of cases, 131, but already a goof up, and the goof up actually led to a better result. So what do you do with that? I'm not a pharmaceutical CEO, and I don't know how to do all that stuff, but it seems, and I'm not a researcher, like a bench researcher, although I was at St. Louis U. So what are you going to do with that information? So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. So that is it for today. I hope you had a good holiday. Hope you have a good weekend. It's very nice here in Boonville. So I will talk to you Monday, probably at 9:30 again. Sorry I was an hour late, but I had to recover from eating so much yesterday, like everybody probably. Okay, talk to you later. See ya. Bye.